we are discussing, or the genesis of this conversation began with the most annoying fan bases. We've tied together that conversation with last week's soundbite from Tim Brando of Fox Sports, in which he said Florida is the most toxic fan base. That was
he said Florida's a toxic fan base. I don't think he said the most toxic.
He said toxic. It is a toxic.
But the key word was the fact that it's toxic.
I believe that conversation on what was called Crane and Company was about college football. So we're going to go hyper-local. We're going to say of the college football fan bases, he believes if you look at all those college football fan bases out there, whether it's in the SEC, the Big Ten, RIP, the Pac-12, Florida, what is a toxic fan base in the context of what have you done for me lately? And, of course, we're asking for you to get in on the conversation at 641-1010. I'm going to read you two very contrasting submissions from some of our Heeligans to further illustrate just how polarizing this topic is. From 891. It's clearly the Gators who are the most annoying. There seems to be an overwhelming number of them in Northeast Florida who have no idea what they're talking about. They have not won the SEC in football in 15 years. To which Kyle on the MyBookie Digital Studio says, that's such BS by Brando. 95% of Florida's fans don't think they are Michigan, Bama, etc. Every fan base has a percentage of fans who are idiots, a.k.a. delusional.
Well, I comparing Florida and Michigan, I think, is perfectly fine. Michigan until last year hadn't won anything in also a very long time. And no Florida fan ever says Florida is as good as Alabama in football only. In other sports, maybe, but not in football. So that's where I think maybe, though, the fans that he's talked to have this misconception. I think most Florida fans think Billy Napier will be fired. They don't want him to be fired. They think he will be fired. And that's because they have seen a litany of issues happen. And, oh, by the way, he took over a program where the head coach before him, and Dan Mullen, didn't recruit for a couple years, just stopped recruiting. So he took over a bad program, and he's made some just serious issues. And, oh, by the way, one of his best players left Gainesville to go to Athens in Trevor Etienne. He wasn't able to retain that player, right? So you also wonder, well, what's going on in the locker room? But I think overall the fan base is not toxic. They're impatient. That's, to me, the better word. Toxic, to me, is more when Ohio State, who has this incredible winning record with Ryan Day, but because they can't beat one team in Michigan, they want him fired. That's crazy. To me, that's toxic. Impatient, though, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of pointed that out last week, Lauren, when we were talking about it, is the impatience part stuck out more to me in this conversation, honestly, because I think we've been talking about it anyways. Is Billy Napier on the hot seat? How hot is that seat? Should they give him a little longer? Because in this, Brando says he's a fan of Billy Napier. So obviously, in his mind, he's thinking Florida fans are giving up on Billy Napier too soon. And that's where, to me, the context was. And then it kind of went a little bit crazy at a certain point, because when you use the word toxic for anybody, that's going to be the word that shines throughout whatever you're trying to say. But I was pointing, I think any college football fan base is pretty impatient, honestly. We live in this world now where it's win now, or what are you doing? What are you doing for me if you're not winning now? And so go to, let's say, Alabama, and we were having this conversation. How quickly are these fans turning on Kalen DeBoer if they're not winning to the level that they were with Nick Saban all of these years, even though he's kind of having to do a lot of it. A lot of people left Alabama. A lot of guys hit the portal because it's a new coach and all of this stuff going on at Bama. So he's kind of having to build his own product there right now. There is a foundation because it's Bama and they've had the success of winning, but how quickly are they going to turn on that, and how quickly is Brando going to say they're toxic if they're in 2-3 years calling for his head because he's not winning a national championship?
Yeah, Mia, you brought this up last week when Georgia had Mark Richt. Georgia was starting to get to the point of, okay, you're a good coach, but you're not getting us a national championship.
Not good. The enemy of great is good.
Right. And so would people have said, well, you're winning 9 games at that point in time to Georgia fans, but that's not good enough? Correct. And that's why we said last week, if you don't make the college football playoff as one of the 12 last standing teams, you are probably on the hot seat as a head coach. Whether you've won 9 games or not, if you don't get to that point in time, your fans are going to reach that same level of impatience. I do understand Tim Brando saying Florida's only had really the 2 successful eras under Steve Spurrier and under Urban Meyer. I totally get that. At this point in time, Florida fans are looking, I think, at Billy Napier and saying he's not one of those guys. And that's where, just because, yes, he's had to rebuild the program, if he can't get us to the college football playoff, then we want someone else. I don't think that's toxic, but that's because, again, I'm looking at it from the perspective of I know what Florida has done in the past, and yes, it's been a while now, but certainly even under Will Muschamp, who certainly was not fit to be a head coach, Florida was winning double-digit games.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what you're getting at, Lauren, is the standard is the standard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's for
your
every single
standard
fan base.
as someone who attended the University of Florida, your standard is make the college football playoff.
Same, yeah. I would bet this is the same standard if you asked Florida State fans.
Mm-hmm.
I would bet it's the same standard if you asked, well, Georgia fans probably a little different. If they don't win at all, then there's
the
something
national
wrong.
championship is
They've
theirs.
But that's
reached that
also
elite
new.
status. Yeah,
Within the last 4 or 5 years,
Oh,
their
absolutely.
standard.
I
hit
think
that.
there's also an argument out there that if your standard is not winning a national title, then what are you getting at? I think that there's a
Yes.
difference there, though, because I think and that's kind of where Brando's getting at. There needs to be a realistic standard versus what, everyone's going to give you lip service and say, I'm trying to win a national title, because
Right.
that's what you have to say.
Yeah.
But I think, again, it's tough because I agree with what he's saying and I also disagree, because I do agree that realistically, I don't think Florida's winning a national title this year. I don't think I'm going out on a limb and saying that. But I do
Which
think,
I don't think a Florida fan would say they think they are winning.
But I
don't know one.
But I do think if you're a Florida fan and you say, if we win 6 games this year, that's great. And if we win 8 games next year, that's great. That is where I say you are compromising on what you have so long said as a Florida fan, which is we are one of the best programs and the best college football teams in the conference.
Because you look at the recruiting area, right? Like the recruiting area here is so fertile that's why really Miami and Florida State and Florida and Georgia and LSU and all these teams in the Southeastern Conference, Alabama we've talked about, Ole Miss at this point, like once you have this, they're a little bit farther, but the rest of the teams that I mentioned, once you have this fertile recruiting area that you can plug from, plus you have a good NIL base, which everyone Miami is one that people questioned for a while. Certainly Florida was late to the party when it comes to NIL, but that is going to get you, to the point where you can go get guys from other schools that had 1 good season or 2 good seasons at another smaller school. You can get them on your roster and you can win right away. You don't have to wait for the recruiting anymore. And so that's where I think Florida fans look, this year for Florida State fans too, they're probably saying just get in the college football playoff.
Right.
Last year win the championship, but this year is probably a little different.
Yeah, because of the confidence level compared to Jordan Travis and DJ Uyunglele. But
I actually thought you got it the first time Taylor.
Okay,
You
I
did.
did. I overthought it. But so I think we talked about that too, Lauren, last week, where I was like 6 of the last 10 drafts, Florida has led in players getting drafted into the
Florida,
NFL,
not
the state of
university.
Florida.
Yeah.
And so when you have that hotbed of players that are coming out of Florida and that talented to the point where they're going on and being drafted into the NFL and being successful there, and you're not able to compete at the highest level, there is some issues there. And I think some of that does obviously go back to pre-Billy Napier, but even now you still have to start taking a look at that.
Right. And look, I think when it comes to Florida State, there were Florida State fans that wanted Mike Norvell out. And that we looked at it and
I'm
said,
actually
well,
shocked Brando didn't bring that up.
Well, and
because I feel like
we only listened to like the
argument.
3-minute clip. I don't know if
No,
he
he
talked
didn't
more
bring it
about
up. No,
Okay.
he didn't.
But I think people looked at that and said, well, remember, Norvell is taking over the mess that Willie Taggart left, even though he was only there for a season or so. But at some point, a little over a season. But at some point in time, you do have to look at it and say, is this the head coach that I think can win me the national championship? That's what we talk about in the NFL. Is this the head coach that I think can win me the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
And if you don't have that person, then you're probably going backwards. It's just a little trickier in the specific case of Florida, because you're talking about a program that over the last few years is now at a disadvantage because of Dan Mullen.
Yeah. Well, and I think I go back to Norvell too. There was a point where people were already calling for him to be fired too, and they were trying to.
There was a Twitter Spaces. Never forget.
Everyone was like, relax
Notorious.
for a second. He's taking over a disaster and has to build this pretty much from the bottom. Give it a minute. And some fans were like, no, this isn't it. He won't let them wear hoodies and he won't let them do this. And it was like this big, crazy, toxic thing that was happening at Florida State. And now look at the conversation, how it's flipped. And that's why I think Brando's like, just be a little patient. It takes some time sometimes.
Honestly, when I was watching and listening to it, it felt like Billy Napier's camp called Tim Brando and were like,
can
we
you
want
help
you
us?
to do a little bit of a PSA for us, because Billy Napier doesn't want to go the route of Mike White when it comes to men's basketball, because Florida fans definitely chased Mike White out of Gainesville and up to Athens. And that is a situation that I think from the outside looking in, you could say was toxic. But I think for me, watching the Gators play men's basketball game in and game out, they weren't very good offensively. They were good defensively, not good offensively.
That was the Mike White situation, yes. Toxic from the fan base perspective in terms of play on the court. That is an example of we're good, we're making the tournament, but we're getting bounced in the first or second round. That is the enemy of greats. And so that is where I want to bring this conversation back to. Let's say, and we're giving patience to Billy Napier. We're giving context to the situation. He wins 6 or 7 games this year. He wins 8 or 9 next year. No, I won't go 9. I'll say 8. Let's say 7 or 8 next year. So it's a 1 or a 2 game improvement.
Ooh.
Is that good enough?
The 6 is going to be hard for a lot of people to deal with this upcoming season.
Okay.
But if you're saying, but Gator fans, this is what people have told a lot of Gator Nation right now. Get through this 3rd season. Mm-hmm. I know it's not going to be pretty. That schedule is brutal. It's one of the hardest schedules we've ever seen. Just get through this season and then see what happens. That is what they are being told right now.
But then what becomes this? Because then at that point, all of his guys are there.
Then it's college football playoff.
So then there's bust. So then you go back to that.
Especially with the expansion.
If it's just 7 wins in season 4, then people are going to say, "I told you so. You should have fired him after season 2 or during season 2." Like that's how people are going to feel.
That is the standard at Florida.
The standard is now college football playoff.
Okay.
A year ago, in the last few years when it was just the 4-team college football playoff, that to me was a little bit different. That is a standard of you're either elite or you're not. And there were only 4 teams that were elite. Now with 12 teams, yes, you should be one of the 12 best teams in all of the country.
Should I bring up the analogy I made last week, Taylor, about Mizzou and Arkansas? Or is that going to just send a dagger through Lauren Brooks's heart? I said that, look, like people wanted Eli Drinkwitz fired last year at Mizzou.
Last year? They did so well last year.
Before. This time last year. And we had someone text in and say that there's no Power 5 program in the country that if their coach went 5-11 against Power 5 competition that he would retain his job. But Billy Napier is here. Mizzou retained Eli Drinkwitz. I'm not saying, but I'm saying, Florida fans, if you're following this Tim Brando school of thought of patience, yes, you do find yourself in the same category as Mizzou, not Alabama, at least at this current juncture and in this exercise, because that's the example I have for you right now in terms of recency.
Yeah, Missouri's a better football program than Florida right now.
Right. And they were, quote
Arkansas
unquote, patient.
Beat Florida, but I wouldn't say that Arkansas's leaps and bounds ahead of Florida. I would just say that with Cam Little, now Jaguars kicker, kicking a 45-yard field goal, they ended up winning the game. Like, they were neck and neck, though. And Florida should have ended up, I think, winning, but that's neither here nor there. Missouri has definitely passed Florida. A lot of teams, Tennessee.
There we go. Repeat that, Lauren. Repeat that.
Passed Florida in the moment, and that's why Gator Nation is so upset.
Yeah. And that's why Brando's saying what he's saying.
But that's not because Florida's toxic to me. That's because the expectations are not being met.
Right.
You don't have. I don't think he's right.
Are those
expectations
expectations
are too
fair?
high.
Are they fair though?
Abso-freaking-lutely.
Okay, so the expectations are fair.
Yes, because you are in the state of Florida, to the point of all this NFL talent's coming out of this state. You are here, you have the facilities, and now the NFL is getting on track. And was that fired up enough for you?
No, it was excellent. This is the best radio of the week on 1010XL. I know it's only Monday. We're only 3 shows in.